Alright folks, Chapter 10, Installing and Managing End User Computers. Well, you might think that it's just, I just go order the fastest computer I can find and install it for all the users and blah blah blah. There's actually a lot of stuff that goes into that. So, without further ado, blah 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 blah, and the overview. So, these are the topics we're going to focus on. So first one, pre-installation. So before you install, before you buy, before anything, these are some things you should check. Space requirements. Does the user have space? Am I going to buy a desktop PC that sits on the desk and the monitor kind of sits on top or it sits somewhere else? Or am I going to put the tower underneath the desk? If I put it underneath the desk, is there space? Is the PC plus the user's purse or whatever else they bring in and put underneath their desk going to cause issues with airflow? If I'm buying a printer for a counter or something, is the counter big enough to hold the printer? Is the counter strong enough to hold the printer? Today's network printers are some pretty beefy things. They can weigh 50, 60 pounds. So we have to make sure that we've got adequate space and structural integrity to hold those things. All right, is it going to require any special furniture? And then we have material data storage sheets. Is it going to have any hazardous chemicals inside it that can come out and splash users or something like that? CRT monitors, if they break, they have bad gas and weird stuff inside of those. And not only that, they can actually hold a charge for like 50 years or something, and a charge strong enough to actually kill a person. Whatever we buy, is it going to cause any ergonomic issues? Am I going to start making this user sit at their desk, for 8 solid hours a day in the same position? Do I need to buy, again, special furniture to help accommodate that? You see people sitting on balls, all kinds of weird stuff nowadays. Are there any OSHA compliance rules for your organization? Do you have adequate power? The last thing you want to do is go buy a whole bunch of PCs and then go to the room and realize that there's not enough power jacks, for everything. So you got to have surge protectors everywhere, and then you've got a surge protector with an extension cord, and you got a surge protector and another surge protector, and then the fire marshal comes and says, "Hey, this isn't going to work." So in Ohio, as far as I know, in Stark County, you cannot have a surge protector plugged into another surge protector. The fire marshal will gig you for that every time. Are there power issues? I hear a lot of users that live in Florida and then some here in North Canton have a lot of power issues. The power grid comes up and down. They get spikes. They get sags. So you have to think about that. Do I have enough network access? Am I buying servers? Do I have enough air conditioning in the room? The more PCs you put in a room, the more heat that gets generated. I ran into a situation over at Akron General years ago where they had a big room that was kind of connected to another big room, but there was one thermostat for both sides. And they decided to put a whole group of people in the one side of the room with a bunch of PCs. Well, once they did that, it continued to get really hot in there, so they had to put the thermostat down. So then the people in the room beside that were freezing and wearing sweatshirts and jackets. And there was nothing they could do other than install a whole new air conditioning vents and systems. Alright, then lighting problems, do I have enough light in the area? And then obviously fire suppression. So anyone can order a PC and install it for somebody, but a good PC tech, looks at the situation and orders the right PC and does his pre-installation things so he doesn't run into problems later on. Remember, proper planning prevents poor performance. Alright, moving on. So locating systems. You've got to devise strategies to conserve space. We don't want the biggest, nasty, bulkiest towers we can possibly find because, I'm worried about airflow. But they don't fit on people's desks. They don't fit underneath the desk. You need to measure. A lot of these desks have like filing cabinets on the right side, and you can't really put a PC underneath there unless you put it on its side. But if you put it on its side, you might block an airflow route that comes out from the processor, depending on which PC you buy, because a lot of them have air vents on the side. So you're stuck putting it where the user's foot is. And then if the user's feet are down there and they're by the cables and stuff, then they throw a purse or a lunch bag or something else down there and they're kicking it and stuff. How long is that PC going to last? And then you have to think about other things. How much desktop space do they have? Can I get a mouse and a keyboard and a monitor on there? And then if I get a monitor, how big is the base of that monitor? Is it going to stick out too far? Is it going to be too close to the user's face? Do I have room for a printer? Where am I going to put the printer supplies? Anytime you have a printer, you got to have paper and toner available. Not too long ago, there with computer desk furniture, it was very popular to kind of enclose the PC somewhere. but they realized that wasn't going to work because the PCs were overheating and dying. So if you have like little cabinets and things, you can't go jamming your electronic equipment into these spaces and keeping them closed because they'll overheat. All right, and there's all kinds of standards for like ergonomics. You know, the optimal desk height is 26 to 28 inches from the floor. But again, it all depends on how tall really the person is and how kind of the body is. But your average user, 26 to 28 inches from the floor. And then the display, there's a bunch of websites you can go to where you can see information about how far the display should be from you and where it should be located in relation to, you know, your head and that kind of stuff. All right, again, supplies where I talked about, especially for printers, you've got to have convenient access to supplies. You don't want users walking all the way down the hall and you know, wasting time every time they need paper or have to take the printer and disconnect everything and pull it all the way out in order to fix a jam. All right, and then when we're buying furniture, you know, we want adjustable height, we want swivel, we want backrest, we want lumbar support. They have waterfall edge seats so that it doesn't kind of like cut off circulation of the legs. You want a typical 5-leg base, you know, the base of your chair. 5-leg typically prevents tipping over. 4-leg, you know, it kind of tip over prone. Anytime you have cords laying in walkable areas, you have to have like a carpet protector for those areas, or a cable cover kind of thing. You can use duct tape, but it's not recommended. It makes your place look ghetto. But also, anytime you put chairs on floors, you need to have a carpet protector, and those carpet protectors can be, you know, anywhere from, you know, $40 to $80, depending on how big and the quality that you buy. And if you don't buy those, then the chairs, the wheels kind of grind the carpet up, and then you have all these spots on the carpet in that room, so you can't do anything else with the room. So it's like, do you want to replace the carpet in a couple years, or do you want to spend the money on the carpet protectors? So when you start thinking about the cost just to have, you know, a couple people on PCs in an office, you know, when you're buying carpet protectors and chairs and desks and then just the regular office supplies, you know, staplers, scissors, that kind of stuff, and then PCs and monitors and keyboards and mice and a printer, and then any network access and cabling, you know, 5 people in a room can be very expensive. All right, so space constraint. You know, you can buy small form factor PCs. You know, if somebody's not really doing anything that's processor intensive, you know, if a user is just getting email and they're searching the internet and they're running one application or they're running Word and Excel, that kind of stuff, a small form factor PC is fine. You may have a separate computer work table, like the one place I worked at visiting nurse service. They actually had like work tables that were kind of like round. And any nurse could come in and just sit her laptop down and plug in to the jacks right there, and then they could kind of work there. And then when they were done, they could kind of go to their desk and do other stuff. All right, you can always wall mount the flat panel monitors, especially if somebody's next to the wall. A monitor offer, nobody's using CRT displays anymore. Don't worry about that. All right, a keyboard shelf. Keyboard shelves are kind of, I don't know. You know, they fit underneath your desk and they kind of like pull out, and then you got to kind of sit farther back from the desk. It's kind of weird. I'm not a big fan of keyboard shelves myself. I tend to disassemble those anytime I have one on a desk that I'm at. But again, some people like to have their desk clean and to be able to use their desk, you know, without the keyboard. I just tend to just move mine. And then extender cables. Depending on where you position the PC, you may have to get extender cables for the PC or for the keyboard and mouse to run all the way behind the desk and then all the way down the side of the desk, you know, to where the actual PC unit is. And again, those can cost anywhere from $8 if you buy the cheap Japanese versions that you can get online, you know, to $20, $30, $40 that you buy at Best Buy. All right, and then your ergonomic factors. Anytime you have people that work on the PC for several hours a day, you want to look into some kind of ergonomic support, whether it's the ergonomic keyboard, you want to make sure that their chairs are good. Really, the best thing for that is to make sure those people are moving around every hour or so. The one place I worked at, there were people, they were coders, and they sat at their desk all day, and they had like an in and an out tray. And they worked through their in tray, and they were coding all these different, you know, doctor visit codes, and that's all they did all day. And they started, you know, they were whining, oh my arm, and obviously, you know, sitting there for, you know, 4 hours a day, then getting an hour break, and then sitting for another 4 hours can be hard on people. So what they did was they actually had a little timer down there, and then every 45 minutes, the timer went off, and then everybody had to get up out of their chair and take a 15-minute break. And it actually helped them a lot. You know, yeah, they lost all that time. And it doesn't have to be 15 whole minutes, maybe 10, maybe 5, but they have to get up and kind of move their wrists and their hands in other directions other than just sitting in that same position typing in things. All right, so there's other things you can do, ergonomic keyboards, ergonomic chairs, making sure that the chair and the desk all fit, right, so that they're not bending down or stooping forward, that kind of stuff. As a business owner, the last thing you want is for a worker to, develop carpal tunnel through your company, and then be on, disability, and your company's paying for that. All right, and then, with different bad ergonomic setups, you could have bad back pain, neck pain because I'm kind of leaning too forward. I can have leg pain because the chair is kind of cutting off circulation to my legs because my legs are just kind of hanging there. Eye strain, headaches, ringer wrist pain, repetitive strain injuries, but really carpal tunnel is the big one that you hear about. All right, and then there's all these different solutions, for different ergonomic issues. If I'm having neck, do I need to replace the chair, that kind of stuff. This stuff is all self-explanatory. There's a lot of these different guides like this, where the monitor should be, where my head should be positioned, and how tall my chair should be, that kind of stuff. Alright, and there's all kinds of stuff you can get into when you start screwing around with ergonomics. Like obviously they have these pictures and different setups, but all kinds of weird stuff. Like this one. What the fudge is that? Like I'm going to sit in that chair all day? That's another interesting one. Ooh, that's an interesting chair. Alright, and really... Alright, that chair might be comfortable for a little bit, but after a while that's going to hurt. Alright, and then this is the chair that I want at my computer station. Yay! The only thing extra this chair needs is like a little hole here so I can kind of like go to the bathroom, and then I'd be all set. Or maybe a refrigerator on the side. Then you have people sitting on balls, and again, and this really helps more with the leg kind of issues. If you're short and your legs kind of hang off the bottom of the chair and they don't necessarily touch the floor, between the chair and the back of the knee, it actually cuts off circulation down to the lower leg, and it can cause issues. And then my favorite chair of all. So again, a bunch of stuff on ergonomics. Really just try to design things, with sense. Make sure that the desks aren't too high or too low. Make sure you get good quality chairs, and then try to position things correctly. And then you'll be fine. All right, some more different, just a list of devices to kind of help you. Ergonomic keyboards, wrist rests, things like that. Some people like touchpads. Some people like trackballs. You get the idea. Alright, they also mentioned that ergonomics is an area where you can kind of like have a specialty and advertise on your resume. That was big years ago, not so much anymore. There was a big push at the beginning of like the, let's say 2003, 2005 era, where people were really starting to focus on being computer users and things like that. And then ergonomics was being pushed, and every company and their mother were pushing out ergonomic products and stuff like that. So you don't really hear the buzzword about that too much anymore. Alright, power. So most small computers don't have special power needs. We have our regular 2-prong outlets, but PCs need 3 prongs, and that third prong needs to be grounded. You would be surprised how many houses and other facilities have plugs that have the 3 prongs that are not wired correctly. Basically, an electrician goes to the jack and he pulls out the 2-prong outlet and then puts in a 3-prong, but he only wires the 2-prong. Remember, that third one, the big round one at the bottom, is just a ground. So if the outlet's not ground, you're not really getting the protection of the third prong. So it's great that I can use it because I can plug into it, but I'm not grounded. So they make things like this. And that's kind of a big picture. But this will just plug in. And again, these things are, $7. And I can plug it in, and it lights up, and it tells me, whether everything is wired correctly in that jack. And again, especially some of these old commercial buildings, you have no idea how these jacks are wired. And for you to assume that all the electrical work is done correctly is a big mistake. Especially when plugging in, a very expensive stuff. Your multi-$1,000 network printers, your $20,000, $30,000 servers, things like that. The last thing you want to do is find out that the outlet was wired incorrectly and did not have a ground on the $40,000 server that you guys just bought and that you just blew up. All right, you don't want to outlet or overload the circuits. You want to make sure you distribute that stuff out. And strangely, most rooms are kind of wired to the same circuit. So you might have to watch that or have an electrician come in. All right, and then power stability, you can have sags and spikes. A sag is when the power drops below normal for a split second, and that can actually force your PCs and stuff to power off. And then the power comes back on, and then so they reboot. And then you start thinking it's an issue with the PC, and it's actually a power issue. And then you have spikes where you get an increase in current for a split second, and that can actually burn out your PC. So depending on where you're at, if the cheapest way is to do a uninterruptible power supply, and that is the power comes in and runs to a charger, and then the charger charges a battery, and then you actually run off the battery. So whenever there's a spike or a sag, it just affects the charger, and it either quits charging or there's something in there to drain off the power from a spike. But you never lose power to the PC. There are also what they call line conditioners that kind of work the same way, but they're a little bit more expensive. Alright, so again, your outlets, especially older buildings, any building that's been around for more than 20 years, you want to check the wiring. Remember, years ago, like even in let's say the 50s, we had knob and tube wiring. And a lot of buildings still have some of that weird stuff still going on in there that people have kind of done some weird stuff to kind of make it work. And the last thing you want to do is use the cheater plug adapters where you can put a 3-prong into a 2-prong. I mean, that might be okay for your hedge trimmers that you're only using 4 times a year, but you sure don't want to use that cheater plug for a $40,000 server. And if you don't have the plug, most places typically have like a electrical tester, and you can test the hot, the neutral, and the ground prongs to make sure that they're all working correctly. Alright, they tell you to check the amperage and stuff like that. I tend to stay away from that and recommend, almost any company that's big enough typically has like I don't want to say a handyman, but that's kind of what they do, like a maintenance people. And if one of them is not qualified to check electrical outlets and circuits and stuff like that, then you need to subcontract that out and have an electrician come in and look at something. Especially, now if you're just going to put in a couple PCs, you're fine. But if you're building a server room or you're adding several servers, you want to make sure that you have the electrical requirements and that they are all up to code before you do that. So make sure that you get those quotes into your quote, whenever you're like, hey, I need to add some more equipment, and it's going to include this cost. Alright, and then shared circuits, you want to make sure that your computer systems aren't on the same circuits as motors and generators. We had an issue one time where somebody put in some lines and he actually wrapped one of the data lines around the motor of the elevator. So every time the elevator went off, it interrupted the data signal. And sometimes when these motors and generators first start up, they can grab a lot of power and then cause everything else to kind of shut down if they're on the same circuit. So make sure you're aware of that stuff. All right, again, power stability. Power conditioner, again, is just a device that kind of regulates the power so that if you have a spike or a sag, you're okay. Today, years ago, you could either buy a power conditioner or you could buy an uninterruptible power supply. Today, I don't think they even really sell power conditioners because an uninterruptible power supply kind of does the job as well. So again, the uninterruptible power supply, when power comes in, it goes into a charger, and then the charger charges the battery, and then you run off the battery. So anytime the power gets disconnected from the unit, you're still running off the battery, and you still have plenty of battery power. So the only thing that happens is the charger stops functioning. So the battery stops getting charged. But the battery is still theoretically fully charged, so you can keep running your devices. So every server or in your other infrastructure equipment like routers and switches should all be connected to uninterruptible power supplies. And that way, if the power ever flickers or goes out, all those devices stay on. Alright, and then tips on power cables. Avoid stress cables. You don't want to have your cables extended too tight, have them go around sharp bends or corners, have them twisted, things like that. If you can feel the cables inside, like the little wires inside the cable, that cable is typically stressed too much, it's twisted. You typically see these with like outside extension cords. Once a person's always throwing them out there and reeling them in, they're always kind of like going around their arm, and it actually twists the cable inside, and then you can actually see the cable, and you can actually see the big thick cables from inside that all kind of twisted in the cable. It's kind of interesting, but anyway, I digress. So they tell you to, for power cables, use wall-mounted power conduits, protected rubber conduits, all that other weird stuff. At the PC level, you just want to make sure that the user is protected against shocks and things like that. So wherever their PC is located, make sure it's not anywhere near their feet or something like that. Make sure the cable's in tight, and then make sure the cables are away from areas where the user can have their foot or feet. If I'm underneath my desk and I'm just stretching my feet and I hit a power cable and it comes out and shocks me, that's obviously bad. So cable ties, I don't necessarily like cable ties because they can get too tight. Plus, if you ever go to somewhere where you need to move a cable real quick, you can't do them. They make the Velcro cable things are awesome. You can get like 50 in a pack for like a couple bucks. And then anytime you go to another PC, you can always just undo it real quick, redo the cables, pop it back on. No muss, no fuss. But if you're using cable ties, the little plastic things, you have to cut one off and throw that away, and then you have to go get a new one. So, which typically involves, if I use scissors, I might poke through the wire itself and not get the cable tie. So then I typically have to go and get another cable tie. It's always issues. So that's why I like Velcro. All right, specialized power devices. All right, a surge suppressor is like a power strip that has a built-in, let's say a fuse. So that if something happens and I get a surge, it trips the breaker or whatever, and then it flips, and then it shuts kind of power off. So that it powers off my devices, by just disconnecting the power. So it stops the surge from damaging my device. Nowadays, we tend to think that any power strip has a surge suppressor in there, but that's totally wrong. If you're getting your power strip for under $10, it does not have a surge suppressor into it. It's just a power strip. Power comes in, it goes out the other 6 ports. There's nothing to stop a surge, so it's going to have issues with all your stuff. Nowadays when we're looking at strips, we're actually seeing surge protector listed, surge protector. That's just a power strip. Surge protector. You want to see the word surge protector. Sometimes just having that light, that's just an on-off switch. Better devices typically have something that you can see whether the surge thing has been tripped. APC is like the big one. That's the big brand for any kind of power device you need for IT. APC is just short for American Power Conversions, and like this is a good power strip. So you can actually do your telephone lines in here. You can do any coax cable that you have, and you can do your regular power strips. And you can see here it's got like an overload light or a building fault light and the protection working. So that if that light goes off for the protection working, you know that the breaker has been tripped and you're no longer protected. So that's what you want. And this one obviously runs a little bit more, so it's $20. But again, for the protection, to spend the extra $10, to protect that $500-600 PC goes a long way. And most of the time when we use surge strips like this, we're not connecting them to one PC. Usually there's 2 different PCs, there's 2 monitors, all plugged into that one strip. So that extra $10 can actually save 2 PCs and 2 monitors, that kind of stuff, if there's a power surge. All right, I don't get too much into this stuff here. That's more the electrician's job, not mine. I just want to make sure that whatever I buy for the PC is rated for a PC, and whatever I buy for a server is rated for a server. And obviously, typically, your server stuff is all going to be rack mounted. You're not going to buy a little surge strip for a server. You're going to get a rack mountable device. And as long as it's rack mountable, it'll handle your server. And as long as it's a power strip, it'll handle a PC. Nobody makes a surge protector plug-in strip that won't protect a PC. Alright, so then there's downtime and uptime. The percentage of hours, a system is unavailable as downtime, then uptime is, the number of hours that's available per month. Obviously, you want, 100% uptime, but sometimes that's not possible. In hospitals run 24/7, so you need obviously the most uptime. But a bank closes at 5-6 o'clock, and then you've got all this downtime to work on different things. If you need to do a system upgrade or stuff like that, that's why it's harder to work in a hospital and financial environments. And when I say financial, like the Dow Jones, things like that. that are constantly monitoring different stock exchanges around the world 24/7. Any 24/7 company is a lot harder to focus on for IT because you don't have that downtime where you can do things. All right, so UPS is just uninterruptible power supply, and again, we've already talked about how that works. The bigger the battery in the UPC or the UPS, the longer it'll go. They have actually little for like $60 you can buy a UPS for a PC, and that way, if the power goes out, it has enough power to run the PC for 10 minutes, which will give you time to actually shut the PC off. And you can actually even get them where they connect with a different cable. Typically it's a COM cable or something like that, and actually the newer ones have USB, where they'll actually plug into your PC and you can install software on your PC or server, and if the power goes out before the battery dies, it will actually power off your PC or your server the correct way so that you don't lose data. All right, and then with nobody's using telephone access anymore. If you go to a company and they're using a dial-up modem, you need to go somewhere else. We're almost all using cable or some kind of a broadband solution. But you can actually get spikes in that way, and this was something that I had no idea. We're going back like 10 years ago. I had bought a brand new firewall for this company I was working at, the foundation. It was like $3,000 or $4,000, and I hooked it up. And your firewall is your access, your barrier against the internet for the bad stuff. So we had Time Warner Cable. So Time Warner Cable came in, connected to the cable modem, and then from the cable modem we went into the firewall. Well, within the first week, it was only like 3 days, so the firewall was up, everything was working. 3 days later, there was a thunderstorm, and those cable modems are designed to pass the surge through and right through to your equipment, and I had no idea. And after the storm, we lost the firewall. Nobody could get out to the internet, but I could connect a PC into the cable modem, and everything worked fine. So I knew it wasn't a Time Warner Cable issue. So I had an electrician come in, and he looked, and that's when he told me, he's like, hey, these cable modems are designed, to push any power surge or anything like that come through the line, right back through to the user stuff. And that way their stuff doesn't get damaged, and they don't have to replace these cable modems all the time. Anytime lightning, hits the wires, which is kind of crappy. But for Time Warner Cable, it was a smart move. But anyway, so yeah, my $3,000 firewall was toast, and I couldn't even take it back because it got fried, and they don't warranty against that. So we bought a new one, and then we bought a surge strip for an RJ45, the data cable, and that way we went from the cable modem into the little device that would stop the shock from coming in, and then into the firewall. So you never know where that surge is going to come in from. All right, and then again, wherever I'm going to be, do I need air conditioning? Am I creating a server room? Am I adding a whole bunch of PCs into a smaller office? Things like that. I might need an HVAC specialist to come in. And then light. Everybody likes light. Everybody works better with typically brighter facilities. If you walk into a dark office, it tends to give us the doom and gloom. Bad old fluorescent bulbs have issues, things like that. All right, and I have to question these slides continue to talk about CRTs. I haven't seen a CRT used in years, but anyway. All right, and then fire suppression. Do you have some way? Are there portable fire extinguishers everywhere? Do people know how to use the fire extinguishers? Do people know where the fire extinguishers are? And then documents. Do I have documentation? Do I know what chemicals are being used? Do I know, like what to do in case something happens? Has everybody looked at these? Is there a policy on, how to repair, how to upgrade things? In larger facilities, you're going to see all kinds of different PCs. You're going to see power PCs, you're going to see the cheap PCs, you're going to see desktop mountable, the slim form factor, you're going to see tower PCs. So you're going to get PCs from every make and model. You're going to see a lot of different operating systems. If I have a user in a basement that's just using the internet, or maybe they're only using Microsoft Office for their job, that's all they need is Office and email. Why would I need to upgrade their operating system? Maybe they have Windows XP, but they don't use the internet for their job. They just use email and Office. So why would I go spend hundreds of dollars every couple of years to upgrade their operating system when they're going to get no benefit to the job at all? So that's why most in the bigger places you go to, you'll see several different operating systems in there. You'll still see Windows XP, Windows 7, hopefully not Vista. Windows 8, and then obviously now Windows 10. You'll see lots of different hardware. The foundation, and this was just 7 years ago, they actually still had a dot matrix printer, and they still use it. They have an old DOS-based program that prints labels out that does exactly what they want them to do. So they have a PC that runs DOS that uses this old dot matrix printer. And we had to make sure we had backups of this software because the company that made it went out of business like 20 years ago, stuff like that. So again, you see all kinds of different stuff at bigger companies. So you need to be prepared. You need to make sure that there are documentation for all this stuff to help you when you have to work on it. All right, and there might be a site management notebook that has hardware configurations, software configurations. You know, when you guys get into your Windows Server and group policy, you know, group policy is what we push out to point people to different things and to restrict people from different things, and that's a pain in the butt. So, but every company has their own ways that they handle that, the ways that they manage that. And then there's software licensing. You know, the last thing you want to do is screw up your software licensing, because if Microsoft comes in and they fine you that you're out of compliance, you're going to get fined, and the company's going to blame you. Warranty information. You know, is this item, you know, under warranty? That kind of stuff. And then backups. Are my backups happening? So here's a sample checklist. Hey, look at that. All right, installation tools. Obviously, you should have a screwdriver, a slot and a Phillips, a nut driver. Pliers, regular needle nose, a parts picker. Years ago, we were dealing with chips and stuff. Like, we would actually have to pull chips off of motherboards and things like that. And nothing was, well, I don't say nothing, but there were chips that were not soldered in that you could replace. That's kind of all gone away. And we don't really need a parts picker. Some additional tools, cable ties, electrical tape, compressed air, small flashlight, things like that. You know, this stuff is all kind of common sense. Hey, look at my nice toolkit. You know, sadly, most PC guys will never even touch that toolkit. They'll use a screwdriver and a nut driver, and that's about the only thing that they'll ever really use. All right, and then, you know, hardware installation tips. Obviously, you want to make sure you have the tools that you need. You want to unpack everything and make sure you're sorted so you have everything. And this says connect the power. That's the last thing I do is connect the power. But these are just different things that you'll do. So you'll connect power, you'll install upgrades, you'll test systems, you'll update documentation in books. All right, so moving on. When you do network installation or you're upgrading something, the first thing you want to do is always make backups. So I want to make sure I back up everything and I have you know, a backup of the user data before I make any changes. Then I can install the drivers. Then I can kind of configure network software, things like that. Because that way, if something goes wrong, I can always recover from the backup. All right, and then before installing new software, you know, always make sure, is it compatible with the hardware? Do I have a backup in place? How am I going to install this? Is it going to be an upgrade, or is it going to be a fresh install? Do I need to uninstall the old version first before I install the new version? Are there any configuration needs that I need to be aware of? Are there any options and stuff that I need to install this with? And then, do I have the right license for this stuff? Is it a single-use license? Is it what they call a volume license key? Do I have the software on disk? Do I have to download it? All kinds of stuff. All right, and then compatibility issues. You know, does it run on my CP? Do I have enough memory for this stuff? Do I have the right hardware for it? Do I have the right cabling for it? And then, can I fit it on a CD? Do I need to put it on a DVD? Am I just going to download it straight from the internet to somewhere else? Do I have enough? You know, how long is it going to take me to download this product? All right, and you can't just copy software. I can't go to a PC and go to the Microsoft Office folder and copy that folder and then move it to a PC and install it and expect Office to work. You know, when software installs, it puts notes in the registry that says, hey, when somebody clicks on, you know, Office, then here's how you want to then go to here to open up the Office folder. Or it puts stuff in the registry that says, hey, anytime, you know, I get a DOC document, you can use this program to open that up. So all of that would be missing, you know, if you just try to move over the folder. So that's why we need to have the installation media. All right, installation types. Express, you typically never want to do the Express, especially when you're updating your PC, because that installs all the crap Microsoft wants you to have. You typically want to choose custom so that you can select which ones you want to install. They also have a minimal install and a full installation. Typically when you're doing software, as long as you've got space on the hard drive and space is not an issue, you want to do a full installation to give the user access to all the different resources of that software. All right, and then to wrap it up, make sure you document the settings. Make sure that you've got backups of the files, that you have rescue disks. Make sure you document any problems, that you filled out any warranty or registration cards. You want to protect the company and make sure that all the stuff is under warranty, and you want to make sure that you're filling out that warranty information and getting it back to the vendor. And then the main thing is you want to make sure that the user is satisfied. Is the user happy when I leave? You want to ask them, is everything working fine for you? Yes. All right. Well, oh yeah, working great now. Thanks. All right. Well, then we're all set. Because then they can't say that that you left them in any kind of situation, because you've obviously verified it with them. And it helps especially if you can get somebody else around that area that kind of sees that. In most of the places you get that. Like most places people work in cubicles and people can kind of hear what's going on, and there's always somebody beside them. So that when you say, hey, is everything working fine, and they say, oh no, it's great, like you've got proof. All right. So site management, when you're managing, a company or the IT department or that kind of thing, these are some different responsibilities that you have. So it's up to you, the manager is overall responsible to make sure that everything is being backed up. Now that's typically not the manager's job, somebody else does the backups, but the manager needs to be checking those backups to make sure that they're happening. You want to make sure that you have the CDs and the software for stuff. Years ago, like when we got a copy of Microsoft Office, we would get obviously the CD for that. We would make a copy of the CD and put the original in the safe, and then we always installed from the copy. And that way, if the copy was ever left in a PC or got damaged, we could always make another one from the original. So the original was only used to make copies. So stuff like that. All right, and then we want to make sure that all our backups are happening. And there's all kinds of different backup media. We can back up to flash drives, we can back up to removable hard drives, we can back up to magnetic tape. Anytime you're doing servers, we're using magnetic tape, because you can use magnetic tape to back up like 400 gigs and things like that, on one tape. And they'll store forever as long as you keep them in the right environment. Where, your USB flash drives, those can eventually run out of power. Like if you keep one in a drawer somewhere, for 8 years, it's going to die. All right, and you always want to have some way to test your backups. The last thing you want to do is be backing up to something, every day for a year, and then when it goes down, find out that your backups were not working, and so for a year you've really just been screwing around and not doing anything, efficiently. So you should have some kind of means, at least once a quarter, once a half year, something like that. To test your backups. Hey, I'm gonna reinstall this backup to the server to make sure the backup is working. All right, and then security. We have all kinds of different security threats. And when we say security, we're not just talking about the bad guys outside. We're talking about electrical attempts. People might try to breach my system by sending surges in or something like that, or maybe cutting down the power for my system. If let's say somebody is disgruntled with I don't know, your hospital, and they run outside and they use something and they cut the power lines. Is the hospital covered for that? Physical threats. What happens if somebody drives a car into this exterior wall that goes right to my server room? And then internal threats. You've got employees. The number one threat to most companies are ex and current employees. Because they have internal access to the company. They're already past the firewall and stuff. They can do what they want. They already have access to things. So that's the one. What you want to be doing is you want to be checking to see if people are doing what they're not supposed to be doing. So in other words, if you've got an HR PC or an HR file server or something like that, you want to be checking to see who's attempting to access that. Because what will happen is most places don't check that. So, 6 months down the road, the HR calls you and says, hey, our HR server has been wiped. What do we do? So at that point, you're reactive. You're reacting to the issue. But if you were proactive and every week or so you were checking the logs to see who was trying to access stuff, you would see that employee number 255 had been trying to guess the password for that server 3 times a day, every day for the last 6 months, and then they finally guessed it. So you could have prevented it by being proactive. So remember, every log file, every PC has a log that tells you who accessed what and who tried to access what. So you want to look for unsuccessful attempts. Then obviously there's the external threats, the hackers and stuff like that. All right, and then threats, we have worms, viruses, and Trojans. What's the difference between a worm and a virus? Most of the stuff that we see are viruses. And a virus requires the user to do something. You have to click on something. You have to make it do something. It requires user interaction. A worm can self-replicate. Once a worm gets on your PC, the worm can do stuff on its own. That's why worms are so much harder to fight than a virus. So 99% of the stuff that you're dealing with is typically viruses. And then we have spam mail that clogs up our servers. We want to prevent unauthorized access. We want to make sure that we're patching operating system vulnerabilities. Microsoft used to have Patch Tuesday, where they were putting out patches every Tuesday for all the vulnerabilities that were reported. And then nowadays there's spyware, there's adware, there's viruses, and then everything else that's not qualified for one of those is called malware. And there's a fine line between security and usability. If you try to make your password policy too strict, people will write down their passwords and put them on notes on their monitors and stuff like that. So you kind of got to handle that both ways. All right, physical threats. You have theft. You have disgruntled employees. We had a place one time that had the back door had you had to swipe your card to get in, and there was a guy, and he kind of waited in his car. He waited for an employee to pull in. He walked in right behind them, walked into the finance office, disconnected a PC, put it up on his shoulder, and walked right out of the building. And nobody ever stopped him or asked him for ID or anything, and it was all on tape, and it was just crazy. So people will do that. And then you have disgruntled employees that will give their spouse or somebody else, information so that they can get inside, things like that. So you've got to be prepared for that. And then for some reason, the bathroom is always on the other end of the wiring closet, where you have your routers and switches. So somebody can always go above the drop ceiling, kind of like flop on over into your wiring closet and gain access that way. So make sure the cinder block goes all the way up on the walls for your wiring closet, and there's no space above the cinder blocks between the cinder blocks and the actual ceiling. Make sure you check above the drop ceilings, because you never know that you could access right into your server room by the room next door. All right, physical security tools. We have keypad entries, badges and IDs, biometrics readers. We have man traps where you have to swipe a card to get in, and then once you get into this little room, then you have to do something else to get through the next phase. And if you don't do the something else, and you thought it was just the security ID, you get trapped in that room. Then security comes in and grabs you. We have motion sensors, but nowadays, a receptionist at a desk that kind of stops people from coming in, things like that. And then, does your company or whatever, do you have a disaster plan? What happens if the power goes out? What's your plan? What's your plan if you get flooded? What's the plan if there's a fire, if there's an earthquake, if there's a terrorist attack? There should be, now obviously you can't plan for everything, but there should be some basic plans. If the power goes out, here's what we do, because obviously that's pretty common. If there's a storm and they're telling people to stay in their houses, what do we do? All right, and then we have risk management tools and strategies. How much risk do we tolerate? All right, and then disaster management tools. Do we have business interruption insurance to offset the cost? When a disaster happens. Have our facilities been inspected by power people and engineering people to make sure that we're covered and that our facility can handle different things? If a lightning strike hits the top of our building, where's it going to go? If we have an earthquake, is our building going to fall down? Where are our backups being stored? If they're stored right in the server room with the servers and there's a fire in the server room, that's not really a good backup strategy. If they're in the same building, now if you've got a huge building that's multiple buildings kind of built together, you can have the server room on one side and your backup copies on another. And that'll work out, because what's the chance of the entire building catching fire or something like that? But as far as the backup tapes, if you're taking backup tapes home, what's the chance of your wife or one of your kids screwing around with one of those backup tapes, or somebody breaking your car window to pull one of those backup tapes out? And now all of a sudden somebody has access to 50,000 customers' health information and social security numbers. All right. So preventive maintenance, we want to be looking at things proactively. In the early spring and then sometime in the fall, you want to have like we had like a spring fling and then some kind of fall thing. I can't remember the name of that was, where the help desk guys would run around and they would go to every PC, and they actually had a list of every PC in the building, and they would blow out the dust from inside the PCs, and they would move them from the backs and clean out the backs, because the back of the walls and stuff get all grimy and things like that, and we would just clean. And we would have users do different things, and we would have contests, who had the most creative way to keep their PC clean, things like that. So keeping the PCs and the equipment clean and dust-free goes a long way. One place I worked at, he actually had awards that the help desk would push out every month for like people that kept their areas the cleanest. So most IT departments have like a small vacuum cleaner. It kind of looks like a little toolbox, and you kind of put the hose on the front, and then it kind of sucks it. Those are actually really good. The last thing you want to do is use an actual compressor, because if somebody puts too much pressure in there, they can blow a circuit right off a board. Make sure you're checking batteries. If I'm looking at my power supplies or my uninterruptible power supplies, does that battery have enough power to run that device as long as I want? Obviously, when the power goes out, I don't need my servers and my PCs to be running. I just don't want them to, be just to lose power and then lose data. I want them to power down correctly. So as long as they've got 10 or 20 minutes so I can run around and go and power everything off, that's good. So there's no need to get 2 or 3 hours of battery life out of a PC in a power failure, because who's going to be playing their PC in a power failure? If the power has failed, your other devices are not going to work, like your cable modem and things like that, so you're not going to be able to get on the internet. So you typically just want to power that stuff off. All right, and then printers, make sure you're blowing them out every once in a while. There's typically feed rollers in those that can be replaced. Don't use the cheap, nasty ink and stuff that you buy from eBay. That stuff always corrupts your printers and clogs the print heads, and then you have issues. Keyboards, make sure they're clean. Make sure they turn them upside down and just give them a good shake and hit them with compressed air. Mice and trackballs, we don't really have those anymore. We used to have the balls inside the mouse where we have to clean that nasty stuff inside there. It was nasty. Nowadays, we just want to clean our track. Make sure that the mouse pads are clean and that the little Teflon pads underneath your mouse are good. And then our displays, we want to make sure we're not using harsh chemicals on our displays, because we can wipe off like the glare removal and things like that. All right, and somebody should be keeping track of the inventory. Where are the printer supplies? How much do we have? How much are we consuming? How many CDs do we have? Are we running low? Things like that. Because you would be surprised how much stuff people steal from your average company. People are stealing paper, reams of paper. People are stealing CDs and DVDs to use them at home. People are even stealing cleaning supplies. We had people stealing phones because they didn't realize that phones didn't work. Like, you couldn't just take that phone home and plug it in and get all these different features on your phone. It just didn't work that way. And then make sure you're checking around for the best price on these things, internet vendors, local supply stores. The bigger supply stores that advertise a lot, like Best Buy and Office Max, don't typically have the best price for these things. All right, and then recycling. Make sure that you're recycling when you can. If you do have CRT monitors, they need to be disposed of properly. Your PCs and things like that are done. You need to dispose of those properly. They had a report on 2020 where people were getting rid of old copy machines and things like that actually had hard drives in those that people didn't realize, and people were taking the hard drives and getting the information off of them. So you want to make sure any hard drives that are being disposed of are destroyed. We used to take ours outside and hammer them with a sledgehammer and destroy the platters and stuff and just break them in pieces and then put them in the trash. But nowadays they actually have metal shredders that will shred those up. So just make sure whatever company that you're at, that you're checking with the area for the correct disposal terms or laws. In a lot of places, you can't throw PCs or any kind of electrical component in the normal trash. They have to be recycled specially. All right, and I think that wraps us up. Yep, chapter summary. Ray! All right, whew, that was a long one, almost 50 minutes. All right, so this week, all you have left, I think you have a on the web, and then you have a quiz, and then you're all set. So remember, if you have any questions or whatever, make sure you email me. Other than that, have a great week, folks.